Okay, now on to our case studies. Here we have three different PLC types. We have an SLC 505 in its own subnet. We have a Siemens S1500 and a control logics. You may note the Siemens and the control logics are on the same subnet, but not the SLC 505. However, Plc Data, PC, can ping all these three PLCs. Once Plc Data has been installed, the login configuration files can be found in the installation directory. The default is C program file 86 ACL apps Plc Data login service files. We're going to use the Excel login configuration file here. It is where the controllers or PLCs and their associated tags to log are configured. Once you open the login configuration file, the Excel login configuration file, it can be seen that the configuration is spread over a few worksheets. Let's go through them one by one. One, the controllers worksheet. This is where the PLCs are configured. Two, the controller events. Each controller can trigger login on demand. For instance, at the end of a mixer or process cycle. The mixer end of cycle is an example of an event. A controller can have one or more events. The controller events parameters are configured in this worksheet. 3. Event tags. Each event has a block of tags associated with it. These are the tags that will be logged when the event is triggered by the PLC. The tags associated with events are configured in this worksheet. A tag can be associated with one or more events. Note, if continuous or frequency-based login is required, the PLC event trigger does not have to be configured. 4. Database. If login to a remote database is required, the connection string is configured in this worksheet. Bear in mind network failure here. 5. The controller type worksheet. This worksheet is protected and should not be changed. It contains information on the supported PLCs and their supported data types. Okay, now we are back in the controllers worksheet to configure our controllers. Out of the box, you'll get our case study fully configured. But what we're going to do, we're going to clear this existing data so we can start over from scratch. So we clear the content. As you can see, we're now left with some blank rows, and we can trim these blank rows by clicking on the minus button. So now all we have is just one blank row. The IP address is something that we enter. The controller type is a drop-down which gives us the list of all the supported controllers. We'll choose S1500. This list, by the way, you can see it in the controller type. Okay, the rack is 0, the slot is 1, the port is 102, and the timeout, which is the connection timeout, is 3000. By the way, the port is fixed by Siemens, Rockwell and most vendors and should not need to be changed. You can't change it here just in case you need to. And rather than you seeing me type the rest of the controller's configurations, we're going to see if we can just copy and paste it from what we had before. In order to do that, we need to expand our table by pressing the plus button. You see, it doubles the size for every press. Okay, here we have our data and we trim our table again, and that's our controllers. As you can see, as per our case studies, we have a Siemens and we have Control Logics and we have an SLC 505. Okay, now that we have configured our controllers, it's time to move on to the controller events worksheet to configure our events. Events are somewhat a little bit complex, so we will spend some time here. Each controller can have one or more events. Each event has several tags associated with it. When the PLC triggers an event, the associated tags are logged into the database. If frequency-based logging is required, there is no need to configure the trigger for the event. Events are useful, especially when data is only available for a short time in the PLC. Example, at the end of a mix cycle, a new cycle will begin and the end of cycle data may no longer be available. Events enable logging momentary data. To configure the events, we need to configure 4 sections. The settings section, the RunID tag, the log enable tag, the acknowledge tag, and we'll explain what these are. Okay, let's go through the settings section configuration. Controller IP. A controller can have one or more events. This is the IP address of the PLC for which events are to be configured. Only configured controllers can be selected. Controller IP is a drop-down and it shows us the list of already configured controllers. Event name. This identifies the event. For instance, end of mix. Several PLCs can have same event name. The event name is scoped to a PLC. Enable. This enables or disables the event. If an event is disabled, no logging of its associated tags can occur, even if the PLC triggers it. Scan time. This is a frequency in milliseconds. It configures how often does PLC data checks the PLC for event triggers. Login frequency. If no PLC trigger is configured and the event is enabled, login is deemed frequency based. RunID section. The RunID is a tag. It can be used to glue together different events data. The RunID purpose is to group several events data to indicate the data is part of the same batch. This is an optional configuration. It can be left blank. For instance, a batch that has been mixed is then baked, cooled, etc. The mixing, baking, and cooling are different events and can have the same RunID to indicate they are part of the same batch. The RunID, as we said before, is a tag. Friendly name is usually a symbol or a name. That's optional. Description, this is a short description to clarify the information the tag holds or what the tag does in some instances. This is optional for login, but is a must for reporting. PLC address, this is the tag address in the PLC, for example, for Siemens data block 2.4, and this is mandatory, of course. The PLC data type, this can be any supported data type, but most people use strings for RunID. Units, this is usually not used. Tags, log, enable, tag. The tags, log, enable PLC address is what PLC data listens for. When it goes from off to on, PLC data logs the block of tags associated with the event into the SQL Server database. The tags log enable is optional. If the PLC address is left blank, then continuous mode is deemed selected, and the login is based on the login frequency of the event. If tags log enable has a PLC address field, then the login is deemed to be PLC controlled, and PLC data uses the configured scan time to listen for login requests from the PLC. When PLC data has logged the data, it turns off the tags log enable flag and sends back a signal to the PLC to indicate the tags have been logged by turning the tags logged acknowledge flag to on. Tags logged acknowledge. Once login has completed, PLC data sends an acknowledge signal back to the PLC. PLC data always turns the acknowledge tag off before login data. Okay, so configuring controller events is not that complicated. Most of the data is entered or typed, except two. The controller IP is a drop-down. It gives us the list of pre-configured controllers, and obviously the enable, disable, whether it's false or true. Please do remember to always expand your table before putting in any new records. And I do have a tip for you. If you do not like entering data in a horizontal way, there is another way. If you go to the top bar and you press that little button and you select More Commands, and then you select All Commands, and you go down and try and find Form. It's a long list, so we need to be a little bit patient. And there it is. Okay, I'm going to press cancel because I have already done it. And the form appears here. And if you click on it, wow, a form appears and you can enter your data that way. But please do remember to expand your table to make room for new records. And also remember to trim your table at the end of blank rows. Okay, now that we have configured our controller events, let's move on to event tags, where we will configure tags for each event. Rather than me typing all of this, let's just go through it. On the left-hand side, you have selected controller event. It's a drop-down list and it shows you all the events that we have already configured and their associated PLCs. The rest of the columns, friendly name, description, PLC address, PLC data type, units, is for the tags. As you can see, for instance, the S7 mixing event has got 6 tags. And the S7 continuous event has got 1 tag. The same goes for the control logics and the SLC. But let's look at the addressing. You see, for instance, DB2 1036 is the flyaway. Let's make a note that PLC data does not support symbol PLC addressing. It supports data block PLC addressing. And you can see the control logics, recipe flyaway, typical way of addressing tags in control logics. In the SLC, you have F8, 0, F8, 1, F8, 2, N7, and so on, which is again a typical way of addressing tags in SLCs. Okay, now that we have configured our event tags, and if login to a remote database is required, we can navigate to the database worksheet. In this worksheet, we need to specify the connection string and then enable the login to the remote database. You can set the remote connection string, but leave it disabled. PLC Data will ignore it and will log data into the locally installed database. For more information, navigate to the controller type worksheet. This is where supported controllers and their supported data types are documented.